Have you ever gotten caught up in a cool character concept? You get really excited about all the cool things your character will be able to do? Maybe you've nailed down a really unique theme for your character, and there's probably a certain level where you'll be able to cast a certain spell or get a certain subclass feature, and that's all great. You should be excited about that. It's what makes making a character in D&D so much fun. But the fun doesn't really stop there. What we've just made there is a character with just strengths, and that's only really half a character. Think about the Lord of the Rings movies. Would we appreciate Frodo and his journey as much if he just flawlessly marched his way all the way to Mount Doom with no problems, no struggles? Probably not. Would Boromir be as interesting of a character if he never gave into the influence of the One Ring? I don't think so. But obviously we shouldn't focus completely on someone's flaws lest we become like Denethor. So then the question is, why do we need to make characters with flaws? After all, we're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and that's all about heroic fantasy, so flaws don't seem necessary. That's completely wrong. Flaws are just as, if not more important to our character than their strengths. They provide more depth to our characters, and it gives them more room to grow over the course of a campaign. And while yes, our characters do have progression through their strengths, that is true, but I find generally when we progress our strengths that we just get better at them. Our character doesn't really fundamentally change. Mechanically, our proficiency bonus increases, and we get ability score improvements and probably bump up our main stat. And that is exciting and a big part of the game. I'm honestly probably the last person to say mechanics don't matter. But what I think is just as important is getting excited for our character's personal growth over the course of a campaign. It is an RPG after all. And of course, a big part of Dungeons & Dragons is the story. There might be one big story arc or several smaller connected ones. Completing this usually leaves us with satisfaction and happiness that we overcame an obstacle with our group, but the same can be said about personal story arcs that come from our flaws. Taking on and overcoming our personal flaws can lead to even greater moments than finishing a campaign story arc. These personal triumphs can leave us with happiness or even sadness. Flaws give us more room to tell a great story of intrapersonal and interpersonal conflict. When you look, there are a lot of parallels between D&D and our favorite books, movies, and TV shows. And a lot of these parallels come from the storytelling. Think about all of your favorite characters from those forms of media. Maybe you really like a hero like Captain America, or you like a villain like the Joker, or perhaps my personal favorite anti-hero, Captain Jack Sparrow. Are any of them perfect? No, they're not. We admire our favorite characters for their strengths, but we only truly understand them through their flaws. No matter how cool or powerful they are, every Superman has their kryptonite. And that makes them stronger as actual characters in the story. It brings them closer to being relatable to us as people. That's what makes them our favorite. So the question becomes, how do we make flaws for our characters in D&D? And how do we make them not suck? Well, let's start with the easiest place to start. Our character sheets. Specifically, our lowest stats. For example, if you have a low dexterity, maybe you have a poor balance and you're very clumsy. A low charisma might mean you have low self-belief and you avoid social situations. Don't we all? And a low constitution might mean you're the first one to lose a drinking contest. These are the type of flaws that are backed by the mechanics, backed by our character sheet. These are the first layer to our character flaws. It's the easiest place to start, and it's probably the easiest to roleplay because the dice actually help us out a lot here. On average, we'll low roll on the ability checks attached to these, and that will show our flaw. While we need to accept these as our flaws, we don't necessarily need to embrace them. And what I mean by that is we shouldn't feel compelled to step up in a situation where we don't have the necessary skill set. Some people might say it's metagaming to not step up in a social situations when you have a low charisma. But obviously your character knows that they have a low charisma. It's not like they're completely unaware of that fact. And why would they step up when they can leave it to the silver-tongued bard? That is actually role-playing our character. Our actions make sense and are consistent with what our characters would think and do. But of course there are going to be those moments where you need to step up in a situation where you don't have that necessary skill set. And in those moments we need to accept that failure. It's a part of our character's flaws. But maybe we'll find an unlikely success. That shows character growth. But there are more layers to peel back when it comes to making our character's flaws. And there's actually another spot on our character sheet that can help us with this. And I feel like this spot on our character sheet is often ignored. But once I started using this spot on my character sheet, my roleplay became much better. It is our bonds, ideals, and flaws. We'll talk about bonds and ideals in another video, so we're going to stick with flaws, obviously. And this portion of the character sheet is super easy to look over. The more interesting stuff is on the left-hand side anyways, right? Wrong. Learn to love the right side of the character sheet, and always have it filled out. So looking at the flaw portion of this character sheet, what do we fill it out with? I think what best fits here is one or two phrases that best encapsulates the flaws that affect our everyday. They shouldn't be super in-depth or thought out. They should be very simple, and when starting to make them, I think we should start in the player's handbook. In Chapter 4, we find personality and backgrounds. Of course, here we find our backgrounds, but a part of each background, you'll find a random table of flaws. They are generally pretty basic, with things like a charlatan has a flaw that they can't resist a pretty face. Or with a criminal, an example flaw they have is, when faced between a choice between money and my friends, I always pick money. Flaws like this are good enough to get you started, or even inspire you to make your own. These, again, aren't mind-blowing, but the flaws here aren't meant to be. They're meant to be simple enough to add an extra layer to our flaws that we can use in our everyday encounters. And even now, with just those few flaws, we're starting to see more depth to our character. But those few options don't necessarily leave us with a very satisfying character flaw. It still feels as though we're missing a foundation for our character. Simply liking money or a pretty face isn't quite enough to give us a full character yet. And that is where our backstory comes in. Whether it's a traumatic event or your upbringing, your character's backstory gives us the greatest chance to create a flaw that is satisfying to roleplay. So how do we use our backstory to give us a satisfying flaw? Let's use a common backstory trope that you've probably seen in your game at some point. My family and entire village were destroyed by a tribe of orcs, and now I hate all orcs. It's not a very good flaw, frankly. It's one-dimensional, it's not creative, it's not unique. It's boring and honestly a little troublesome just to see my character hates an entire group of people. It's just not conducive for a fun game of D&D, and it can lead to conflict in or out of the game. If you make a rash decision and randomly attack an orc because it's your flaw, you're not being a very good player. It can lead to the "it's what my character would do" defense, and that is usually only used when you've made a decision that your party finds irritating. So then how do we use this backstory, my family and entire village were destroyed by a tribe of orcs, and not end up with the flaw, I hate all orcs? Well, when we create a backstory, it usually involves two things. It establishes what we did prior to adventuring, and it provides a call to action, a reason we started adventuring. This call to action is usually to get stronger for a personal reason, and we can use that to apply to our example. We want to grow strong enough to get revenge on the orc tribe that killed my family. But rather than just simply hating all orcs, we focus on getting stronger to exact our revenge, and nothing will stop us. I never want to feel the sadness I felt when my village was destroyed, so I always want the satisfaction of getting my revenge. When we are crossed or done wrong, we obsess in getting revenge. No one gets away from stealing from me. No one gets away from ambushing me. I make sure people regret wronging me. That is a better flaw. That doesn't necessarily mean we slaughter everything that has wronged us, but they must be dealt with. They must regret wronging me. This gives our character a feeling of strength, that they are closer to getting their goal of getting revenge on that orc tribe. It certainly sounds better than just hating all orcs. It's open-ended enough and gives the dungeon master something to work with. And once we deal with that part of our backstory, we may overcome that flaw. Maybe we realize obsessing over revenge just isn't worth it anymore. Or maybe we exult in the revenge, and our flaw remains the same. One very important thing to remember when making a flaw is, don't overdo it. We don't want our flaw to be debilitating. We don't want it to be a distraction from the game. We also don't want to cause conflict between our group members. Yes, the people sitting around the table with us. There can be a fine line between conflict between characters and conflict between players. I can't possibly know what your table dynamic is, so I can't really give you exact specifics here. The general advice that I can give you here is talk to your dungeon master. Ask them if they think your flaw would be troublesome for your table. Ask them if they think your backstory and corresponding flaw are appropriate for the table. Ask them if they think they can fit it into the campaign. Ask them if they think it'll work in the party. With your dungeon master, work together and make sure that it does work for your party. Make sure it does work for the campaign. And from there, you'll have a much more satisfying character to roleplay. And I'm sure a very satisfying personal story to tell. That's all I have to say about using flaws to make a better character concept. Hopefully you found the video helpful, and if you did, feel free to subscribe. There's more to come every Tuesday and Thursday. Hope to see you on the next one. Take care.